I want you to close your eyes for a second. Just picture his scene.
Okay.
It's January 1st, 1894. We are in Bavaria.
Yeah.
Specifically, the town of Passau. And if you've never been to Passau, it's geographically fascinating. It's known as the City of Three Rivers because you have the Danube, the Ilz, and the Inn all converging in this one spot.
Right.
But on this specific day, it is bitterly, bitterly cold.
And when we say cold, I mean that bone-chilling Central European winter cold. The sources we're looking at today describe the landscape as being covered in this fresh dusting of powdered sugar.
Yeah.
It sounds incredibly picturesque, almost like something you'd see on a vintage holiday card, you know?
Exactly. It's quiet, the snow is fresh, the air is really crisp, and you are standing on the banks of the River Inn. The water is icy and gray, and it's moving fast. And right on the bank, you see a group of children playing.
It just looks like the absolute definition of innocence.
It really does. It sets the stage for what feels like a heartwarming memory. But we aren't here today to talk about the scenery or the beautiful architecture of Passau.
No, definitely not.
We are digging into a moment that happened on that frozen riverbank. A split-second event that fits into a category I've started calling a devastating rescue.
I love that phrase, devastating rescue, because it's such a contradiction, right?
Yeah.
Usually when we cover stories about children saving other children in these deep dives, it's the ultimate feel-good content. It restores your faith in humanity. You walk away thinking, okay, the kids are all right.
Right.
But this is entirely different.
So different. This deep dive is really about a single moral act, saving a life. An act that arguably changed the course of human history for the worse.
Yeah.
We are looking at the incredibly heavy irony of unintended consequences. And we've got a really compelling stack of sources today.
We do. We're looking at historical archives from Passau, personal revelations from a priest named Max Tremmel, and investigative files that were eventually uncovered by reporters.
And our mission today, really, is to unpack the burden of the what if, the paralyzing nature of hindsight.
So let's zoom back in on that riverbank. January 1894. The archives paint a very specific scene of what those kids were actually doing out there in the snow.
They were playing cowboys and Indians.
Right.
You can almost hear it. The air is filled with what the historical accounts call Sioux war cries, and children shouting, "Bang, bang, you're dead." Just classic rough and tumble play.
And in the middle of this galloping herd of children, there is one boy in particular that we really need to focus on. He's 4 years old, and the description of him in the records is quite telling, because he definitely isn't the leader of the pack.
No, not at all. The medical descriptions and the accounts from the time describe him as sickly and frail.
Yeah.
He was small for his age, and he was wearing these thick glasses. You get this image of a kid who's just desperately trying to keep up with the bigger, louder kids.
Just running with pure determination.
Exactly. Trying to be part of the game, probably terrified of being left behind by the older boys.
And that determination is exactly what leads to the accident. The terrain along the River Inn isn't forgiving, especially in the dead of winter. You have these steep embankments covered in slick snow.
Right.
This frail 4-year-old is running, he loses his footing, and he trips. He falls right over the embankment. And there is this one detail in the reports that is just cinematic. His eyeglasses actually fly off his face and through the air as he hits the ice.
And we aren't talking about thick, solid skating ice here either. The River Inn has a current. The ice near the banks can be incredibly treacherous.
Oh,
He
yeah.
breaks right through that thin sheet. Now remember, this kid is 4. He cannot swim.
No.
The water is freezing, likely just a few degrees above zero, and the current takes him immediately. The text says he was being swept downriver towards certain death.
And make no mistake, in those temperatures, with that clothing-heavy wool that soaks up water like a sponge, this is a fatal situation 99 times out of 100.
Easily.
This really should have been the end of the line for this 4-year-old boy.
But it wasn't. And this is where the miracle, if we can call it that, happens. Enter Johann Kuehberger.
Johann, the neighbor kid. He was only 5 years old himself, just a tiny bit older than the boy in the water.
I have to stop you there, though, because I think we gloss over this too easily. 5 years old.
Yeah, I know.
I have a nephew that age. He can barely tie his shoes, let alone perform a swift water rescue. The physics of this seem almost impossible. How does a 5-year-old pull another kid out of a freezing river?
It is a totally fair question, and it really speaks to the adrenaline of the moment. Johann hears the scream. He doesn't run to find an adult, which, would be the logical thing to do, but it would have taken way too long.
Right, the kid would be gone.
Exactly. He doesn't freeze up. He acts on pure instinct. He jumps onto the ice, or perhaps into the shallow edge of the water. The accounts vary just slightly on his exact footing, but he reaches out.
That is incredible bravery for a kindergartner.
It really is. He manages to grab his playmate, probably by the collar or the arm, and he leverages him back onto the solid ice. He completely saves his life. And in the immediate aftermath, this was treated exactly how you would expect.
Right, Johann was a hero.
A cult hero.
The local newspaper in Passau, the Donau Zeitung, they wrote it up. It was this pure, celebrated act of bravery.
Yeah.
A child saving a child.
Exactly. And if the story ended there, it would be a really nice local legend in Passau. Remember that time little Johann saved the neighbor kid? It would be a story told at family gatherings.
Yeah.
But that is not where the story ends, and this is where we have to drop the bombshell that our entire stack of sources revolves around.
Because these two boys grew up, and they took very, very different paths. Little Johann, the hero, he grew up to be a man of faith.
Yes.
He became a priest, Father Johann Kuehberger. He dedicated his life to serving God and, as the text says, trying to save those in distress.
And the 4-year-old boy, the frail kid with the thick glasses who was pulled from the freezing water,
Yeah.
that was Adolf Hitler.
It stopped you in your tracks, doesn't it?
It really does.
Even though I knew we were discussing this today, even though I've read the sources, hearing it out loud is jarring. A future priest saves the life of a future dictator.
It is the ultimate irony. It's almost literary in how tragic it is. You have Johann, who grows up to save souls, and the child he saves grows up to become, in the exact words of our source, one of history's most diabolical monsters.
Oh wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
Do we know for an absolute fact this was Hitler, or is this just one of those urban legends that pops up? Like, oh, I heard Einstein failed math, which we all know isn't true.
Yeah.
Is it just folklore?
That is the million-dollar question. And for a long time, historians were actually pretty skeptical. But this is where the deep dive aspect of these sources really comes in. The confirmation comes from a few places. First, the newspaper archives in Passau confirm a young fellow fell in and was saved by a comrade in January 1894. It doesn't name Hitler specifically, but the dates, the location, and the ages match perfectly. But the real smoking gun came much later.
Right, the investigative reporter.
Exactly. In 1980, the Bavarian radio aired a special program where they had dug up testimony from people who knew Father Johann personally.
Wow.
They found files and oral histories from his fellow clergy. And then there's the behavior of Hitler himself later in life, which is very telling.
That's what I find fascinating. Later in life, when Hitler is in power, writing Mein Kampf, giving speeches, did he ever talk about this? Did he ever acknowledge that a priest saved his life?
Well, yes and no, and the no is very, very specific.
How?
Hitler often reminisced about his childhood in Passau. He would talk about playing cowboys and Indians on the banks of the Inn River. He remembered the games, he remembered the setting perfectly, but he never ever mentioned the near drowning.
That seems like a pretty massive detail to leave out of your life story. I almost died, but I was miraculously saved. Usually, politicians love that kind of destiny narrative.
They do, but only if it fits the specific narrative they're trying to build. Think about the image Hitler cultivated. The Superman, the Führer, the invincible leader who was destined to rule.
Right. The myth of total invincibility.
Exactly. It didn't fit the Nazi myth to admit that the Superman was once a frail, drowning child who needed to be rescued by a neighbor.
Yeah, that ruins the illusion.
It completely spoils the narrative. And to make it worse, from Hitler's warped perspective, he was saved by a future priest.
And we know Hitler's relationship with the church was complicated, to say the least.
He absolutely despised the institutional influence of the church. Being saved by a representative of a religion he hated would have been unacceptable to his image. So he suppressed it. He essentially edited his own history.
But while Hitler just ignored it and erased it from his story, there was one person who couldn't ignore it. Father Johann. And this is the part of the story that really gets to me, honestly. We have this testimony from a man named Max Tremmel. He was a fellow priest, someone who knew Johann very well, and he reveals that this wasn't just a funny anecdote for Johann, it was a burden.
A heavy, crushing burden. Tremmel revealed that Father Johann spent many sleepless nights obsessing over that rescue in the winter of 1894.
Sleepless nights.
Yeah.
Just imagine that. You are a priest, you've dedicated your entire life to doing good, to helping people, and you are lying awake, staring at the ceiling of your rectory, replaying a moment from when you were 5 years old,
Yeah.
replaying an act of pure kindness that turned into a global nightmare.
It's the haunting nature of memory, combined with the torture of historical hindsight. The source explicitly says that saving that childhood playmate would haunt him to his dying day.
Wow.
He wasted far too many nights second-guessing himself.
And that's where we get into the whole what-if scenario that the text explores. The sources lay it out pretty starkly. They pose the question, if 5-year-old Johann could have seen the future just for a split second before he jumped into the river.
He might have stopped dead in his tracks. That is the exact phrase used in the account. Stopped dead in his tracks.
It's chilling to think about. Because if he just hesitates for 10 seconds, the history of the 20th century looks completely different.
Countless millions would have been spared terror and death. That is the sheer weight of the realization. If only that rescue hadn't happened. If only nature had been allowed to take its course on the Inn River that day.
Yeah.
It really forces us to confront a version of the trolley problem, but completely inverted.
How so? Like, what do you mean by inverted?
Well, in the classic trolley problem, you usually have to choose to do something bad, like pulling a lever to intentionally divert a train to hit one person to achieve a good outcome, which is saving 5 people.
Right, the lesser of two evils.
Exactly. Here, Johann did something inherently good. He saved a drowning child at great risk to himself. But the outcome of that good act was catastrophically bad for the world. It challenges our whole moral framework.
But he couldn't have known. He was 5?
No, of course not.
He's playing cowboys and Indians. He wasn't thinking about geopolitics or the 20th century. He was thinking about his friend losing his glasses in the icy water.
Precisely. And that brings us to the real philosophical core of this deep dive. This story isn't just about Hitler and a priest. It's about the human condition. It's about what the source calls the paralysis of analysis.
Let's really unpack that, because I think a lot of us do this, obviously, on a much, much smaller scale. We obsess over our choices. We worry if we said the right thing in a meeting, or if we made the right choice about where to live or who to date.
We do. We are obsessed with outcomes. The text argues that every act has consequences. That is an undeniable fact. But the second part of that argument is crucial. We are blind to them.
Yeah.
We can never, ever truly know what the future will do with our decisions.
It's the butterfly effect. You flap your wings, or in this case, you pull a kid out of a freezing river, and a hurricane happens 40 years later.
And that unpredictability is terrifying. If we truly understood how much our actions matter or how badly they could turn out despite our best intentions, we might never act at all.
We just freeze.
That is the paralysis.
So if Johann had been paralyzed by the fear of the future, he wouldn't have jumped. But because he didn't know, he did the right thing, the moral thing.
And yet, he suffered for it. He suffered deeply from regret. The text mentions that bitterness and regret over yesterday's choices can absolutely consume you. Father Johann was consumed by the painful consequences of an act of pure kindness.
I can't even imagine the confessionals he must have wanted to give. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I saved a life. It twists your brain just thinking about it.
It really does.
So how do we resolve this? Because the source material actually offers some advice here. It tries to offer a way out of this mental trap of regret.
It does, and it's advice that applies to anyone, whether you're agonizing over global history or just your own everyday life. It concludes that because we cannot control the long-term outcomes of our acts, we have to release that burden. We worry far too much about the things we cannot see.
I think we all really need to hear that. We carry so much anxiety about the future.
The final advice from the source is very simple, but incredibly difficult to practice. It says, do the best you can do and leave the results to God.
Leave the results to God.
Yeah.
And, whether you are religious or not, there is a really profound wisdom in that. You control the input, not the output.
Exactly. Johann controlled the input. A brave boy saving a drowning friend. That was the best he could do. That was the moral high ground. The output, who that friend became, the horrific choices that friend made decades later, that was completely out of Johann's hands.
It really is an incredible juxtaposition. I'm just thinking about that image again from the beginning of the deep dive. The thick glasses flying through the air, the snow, the screaming. Feels like such a fragile, tiny moment.
And the heavy silence of the years that followed.
It's a story that almost feels like fiction, but it's grounded in these real files from Passau. It's a reminder that history isn't just dates and battles and treaties. It turns on these tiny, fragile moments. A slippery bank, a thin sheet of ice, a lost pair of glasses.
And a conscience. That is what really stands out to me, the conscience of Father Johann. He carried the weight of the world, quite literally, on his shoulders because of a game he played when he was 5 years old.
It really highlights the difference between intent and outcome. We judge ourselves on outcomes so often in life. Did it work out? Did I succeed? Did I make the right call? But this story tells us that sometimes the outcome is a disaster, but the intent was still completely pure.
And that has to be enough. If we judge our past selves by information we didn't have at the time, we will destroy ourselves. We have to look at the seed of the action, not the fruit.
Right.
Johann didn't save a dictator. He saved a 4-year-old boy.
That's such a powerful distinction. At that exact moment in time, he saved a frail 4-year-old boy.
We have to find freedom from that paralysis. If you hesitate to make decisions today because you are terrified of how they might play out tomorrow, you become frozen. You stop living. You stop being human.
It's a lesson in forgiveness, really. Forgiving yourself for things you couldn't possibly predict, because if we don't, we end up exactly like Father Johann, staring at the ceiling in the dark, wondering what if.
And that is how one to live.
No, it isn't. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the rescue paradox, I want to leave you with a thought. We've talked about a priest and a dictator, and it's this huge, heavy historical event. But this applies to you too.
It applies to all of us, every single day.
Is there a decision from your past that you are still analyzing? Maybe not saving a life on a frozen river, but something where the outcome wasn't what you hoped. Maybe you took a job that didn't work out, or you introduced 2 people who ended up hurting each other.
We all have those moments.
Can you find the freedom to accept that you did the best you could with the information you had at the time? Can you look at your intent rather than just the final result?
Do the best you can do.
And let the rest go. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.